A Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall, Prison Reform. Now from Birmingham, Alabama, here's Armstrong Williams.
Hello everybody, I'm Armstrong Williams and welcome to another edition of Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams, your host. Is it prison reform or is it citizen reform? What do we need to do to reform citizens in this society, be contributing citizens, and to get back to a normal work life? The president had a town hall, what do we call it, a town hall? He was meeting with pastors from across the country, and the topic was prison reform. And our town hall had been set up months in advance, so obviously, if the president of the United States is talking about it, we want to talk about it too. Welcome to this edition of Your Voice, Your Future, as we discuss citizen reform.
You know, I believe that this issue is one of the only issues that we could agree on in this divided country, in this divided time, and everything's so polarized. But I think one of the only things we could agree on is that there's something that needs to change in our penal system. We need to change the laws on the front end so, you know, we could give first offenders a little bit more of a break, and we could incarcerate the violent people that don't need to be out there, out there with our children and out there with us. So education on the front end is important. Now, unfortunately, there's always going to be crime. There's always going to be problems in society. So if that doesn't work, and there are times when it won't, once people enter the criminal justice system, there needs to be more of a focus on diversion and strengthening probation laws, making people, if they're on probation, making them accountable, making them go to certain programs to better their lives so they don't recidivate. Also, getting rid of mandatory minimums. There are so many mandatory minimum laws, particularly with drug cases. You have these first-time offenders sentenced to sometimes 25 years in prison, first offense because of drugs. Mandatory minimums are basically a way to force people to plead guilty, right? Because you have this crazy mandatory minimum. The prosecutor is going to say, well, you're going to get this giant sentence if you go to trial. So even if your guy's innocent, I'll offer 2 years. Says he did something he didn't do, because if he loses, he gets 25. But we need to focus on safety in prisons. Here in South Carolina, there was a riot and 7 people died the same day while guards stood by and did nothing for hours. So we need to make those places safe. It's going to be a punishment. You're going to be away from your family. You're going to be in a place that you do not want to be, but the state needs to make sure that there's a basic safety element there.
Welcome back. Let me introduce our very distinguished panel. We want to welcome them all and thank them for joining us today. Jennifer Gosselin is no stranger. She's one of our very own ABC 3340 anchor. We're also happy to have Shay Farley with the Southern Poverty Law Center joining us, and Wayne Hurd, who is a court advocate for the Damon Project. You're listening to the package from South Carolina, and we continue to have the same conversations, come to the same conclusions, not much change. Somebody's getting rich, somebody's getting poor, somebody's getting slammed in the court system, somebody's plea bargaining and having no idea what they're doing, plea bargaining their life away. They're being manipulated not only by their lawyer, but also they don't want to get in the way of the judge because it's very political there. We don't want to have the conversation today where it's about left or right. We really want to have a conversation for the next hour where we really empower people on what needs to change, to really do something, not about prison reform, but really about citizen reform. What is it that we keep doing that we should not be doing? And to take the politics out of it, what is the problem?
Well, there's a
candidate speaking.
That's a loaded question. There's a plethora of problems. One of the biggest things, first and foremost, as citizens that we can do is understand that these are people. People that are incarcerated are people. We have to see them as people and respect them as such. A hopeless person is a dangerous person. So if most of society sees them as castaways, they've committed a crime or alleged to, and we treat them as such, it's very easy for them to lose hope. And when someone loses hope, it's hard for them to rehabilitate past that point.
Give us let me ask you, Shay, give us a scenario that has worked consistently.
There is yet to be a justice system that has been totally revitalized to where it's working functionally perfectly.
Well, give us an individual that it has worked for and why it worked and why their issue their circumstances was different from what the status quo is.
Sure, I think you're exactly right, Wayne. These are humans. And I think that you started off by saying this isn't a left-right issue, and I'm appreciative of that. But what we need to do is we need to stop using demagoguery and just buzz lines. It is about public safety and it is about taxpayer resources, but it's also about humanity. I think when we step back and we look at who's incarcerated and why and for how long, what we also need to talk about is why. Are we doing the right thing? And so to your direct question, give us an example of something that's worked. There are myriad of stories, but you don't ever hear that on the news. You don't ever hear the good guy that the Dannon Project or the good woman that the Dannon Project or Greater Birmingham Ministries or any of the other reentry programs.
I want to hear the story.
A story. President Obama hired someone who was ex-offender that went on to work with the Justice Department and went on to be a very successful person. So I think while it's hard to come up with one story, I just think that there are many like this. Wayne, you might have one that you've worked with that you could give a better example current.
Well, definitely. We have participants, a wide range of participants. One that notably comes to mind was a gentleman that was incarcerated for nearly 20 years, I think maybe 25 years. He got out, was able to come to the Dannon Project, get several certifications, pathways out of poverty, helped the shelter and his care, and he has been gainfully employed for the past 3 years. So that's one story, and we have many participants like that. Thankfully, there are organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Dannon Project, Love Lady Center, various partners around the state, and I'm sure the country, that actually are deliberate and intentional about wrapping our arms around these individuals and showing them love and care and equipping them with the resources to not only survive, but to thrive. Now, if that minority of organizations starts to become a majority in the mindset that we all adapt, we will have a lot more success.
So Jennifer, does the crime, is it more important in the crime a person's class or their race, or is it the crime in and of itself?
I think quite frankly, I think that depends on who you ask that of. I think that with some of the research that I have seen, they say that depending on the person's class, they are more likely to end up going to prison. But then others would say that depending on also on the person's race as well. Of course, we know that more Black people tend to fall in the along the poverty line or below, and so both of those would end up playing a role. To speak to what you just spoke about.
Oh no, I don't want to leave that just yet.
Sure.
I want to say with this because I'm going somewhere with it. See, listen, I get stopped often by law enforcement because I like to drive fast, and I have never had a bad experience with a cop, ever. My attitude. It's not even about my feeling intimidated, because a lot of times I'm usually wrong, and I admit that. And even sometimes when I see a law enforcement official, it's all about your attitude, because you say he has the power, but you have the power too. How you meet them and how you feel about yourself, your own self-esteem and your own self-worth, or whether you've taken to him that you believe because of your race that you already, the deck is already stacked against you. You're going to be treated unfairly, you're going to be beaten, and you may be killed. Sometimes when you take those insecurities to a situation, the damage is not only done by the officer, but part of it is done by you. What I'm trying to do is get into the mindset of where we get to the point. Are there statistics that bear out, and I want to deal with this, that Black people are treated different because they're Black, or is it because of the crime, what they're being stopped for?
Okay, so you just said something that I think is important, because you're saying that when you go into a situation, you are just as responsible for the outcome of that situation as the person you've interacted with, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. We're talking right now about prison reform, and we're talking about the fact that so many of these households, there's more than just the person who goes to prison that is being punished. So there's also the family. And if you are talking about, and you may have grown up a little bit differently. I don't want to judge how you grew up, but I do know that when the father is not inside that house, or the mother is not inside that house, and the emotional issues that a lot of these kids end up bringing with them, unresolved issues, trauma that has not been addressed, you cannot tell me that person is going to feel confident when they're stopped by an officer. The same uniform that may have pulled their father or mother out of the house in front of them. And so I think that there are a lot of different other issues that are brought. I'm not justifying the way they behave.
I think you make a very good point, because listen, as an employer, I can tell immediately whether a young man that works for me has had experience with a father figure because of the way they react to male authority, the way they react to supervision. They have the tendency to rebel if they don't have a father in the home. All that plays out in the larger society, whether it's police officers or anything else. A lot of it has to do with the household and how you feel about your self-worth. And because sometimes when I'm in my neighborhood and I see a police officer, I grab him and hug him as it's one of my boys. I just joust with them and play with them. And some of these kids look at me like I'm crazy. You can interact like police officers. They don't even see them as being human. They think they're monsters. And if you feel that way, it's going to carry over and play out somewhere.
Absolutely.
And how do you change it?
I can't speak to the reasons or biases, but the system shows there is bias. Okay, 1 in 25 African American males in Alabama are incarcerated. That is 3 times the number of whites, and you can't tell me that there are 3 times more likely.
So tell me this.
Okay.
And this is maybe naive. Why in the world would you treat somebody fairly or unfairly because they're black?
Again, I hope I wouldn't.
Tell me why. I need to know, because we keep saying this. What we want to get to today, why would anybody be so ignorant, so immoral to discriminate or treat somebody unfairly just because they're black?
Wayne, if I may give one more statistic that lets it
Not
play
the
out.
statistic. I need you to answer this question for me.
Well,
it's an important question, because there's some young black kid watching this show and somebody else, and they need to know why in the world would that officer single them out?
I don't know that it's exactly a fair question to always be putting the onus and the burden on the individual who is approached by a biased cop.
Why would the cop be biased? Is it their training? Is it their races? Are they bigot? Why would the cop be biased in the first place? If they're sworn to a duty by that badge that they wear, they uphold that law to be fair and just to everybody, because justice is blind. Why would the officer be blind? Are they being trained that way?
So to speak directly, you answered your own question, and it is unambiguous. There's no disputing that minority males are incarcerated and have more interactions with police officers. But it's ignorance. It's ignorance, dare I suggest, on both sides. It's an apathy. It's a lack of knowledge of what this officer, they're just doing their job. And this young man that I've pulled over, that they're not a criminal. It's ignorance because we don't communicate anymore. As people, as citizens, we do not communicate. So it's ignorance, I would dare believe, on both sides of what the interaction is, what the law is, and that no one wants someone to end up dead on the side of the road.
So you plead, because if I'm a law enforcement officer, because it doesn't differentiate with whether they're black or white. When an officer stops someone, if that person just happens to be black, they feel a greater threat.
I can't speak for all officers.
I'm asking the question.
I would not necessarily say that. I
Okay,
mean,
so it has to be something.
If you and I are pulled over in separate cars, I would argue that if there was going to be some sort of bias, I may possibly get off easier than you because I'm a woman, right? And so I think that inherently there are some things that you carry with you. I think that in order to have a conversation like this, we have to be very honest about those things. You do not approach anyone with blinders on. You just don't do that. And you also, unless you have really addressed the way you grew up, as you just mentioned, unless you have been trained, and unless it has been a very clear and purposeful part of your organization, to say of your organization's philosophy, to say that we don't disagree. We treat everybody the right way, and you have to have those types of things to be ingrained.
I'm going to take a quick break.
They have to be ingrained.
Oh no, we're going to take a, because we're going to have a real conversation here today. We're going to get down to the nitty gritty. Okay, we'll be back.
I remember, Dad, you and Mom got this car with a hatchback. I said, I'd be happy to give you the money to get a really great car. And he said, well, no, this works for me. I says, why? Because it's the right height to put the meals in. Dad, tell me when you first got an inkling about Meals on Wheels.
There was kind of an abandoned house. That's where we got started with Meals on Wheels. We kind of filled a need for people as they got older.
It's the human interaction that probably fed them much more than the food.
Oh, yeah. When you can see somebody else benefiting by your life in some way, you can't help but feel good about it, I think.
Well, the reason I'm involved, Dad, is because you are, and you're so inspiring. How you've impacted people is enormous.
Drop off a warm meal and get more than you expect. Volunteer at americaletsdolunch.org.
America, let's do lunch.
Guess what? I have some news for you. There's free food right there, junk food. You see that truck? Oh, jeez. It's a 2 Michelin star chef. All for free, ladies and gentlemen. All for free.
Here we have a panzanella with summer vegetables and pesto. Enjoy. How we doing?
Fantastic.
So what do you got going on underneath that plate there?
This food is really about to be thrown away.
Yeah.
Is there something wrong with this food? Where did you get it from?
From farmers markets. They put aside the ugly vegetables and the ugly fruits.
Carrot top, soft avocados. It was all food that was going to be discarded.
Even the drink you had is made from like a little bruised peach. Did it taste a little bruised?
Great. That was good.
The average person throws away 24 pounds of food a month.
That's a lot.
Isn't that a lot? Go visit savethefood.com for more information. Thank you. Junk food time!
You think getting dumped by text is harsh? Try getting dumped by a tennis ball. My ex-owner drove me out to the woods, yelled fetch, and by the time I brought the ball back, he was gone. Yeah, I was pissed. But the folks at the shelter helped me let go of my anger. I learned coping skills, like taking it to the hole. Boom! Now I'm ready to fetch again. But how about I throw and you run and get it?
And Mary Jones is joining the conversation. She is the coordinator for Women's Strength Program. Ms. Jones, welcome back to the show. It's always a pleasure seeing you. I'm curious to know, opioids is almost like crack cocaine 30 years ago, if you fast forward. And if you look at marijuana today, marijuana is being legalized all over the country. And it's like a Schedule I crime, but it's being legalized. How does that impact? There's so many people who are incarcerated because of this marijuana drug. It's changed, it's being legalized. How should the system look at this now as we talk about this issue of reforming prisons, citizen reform? Start with you.
I'd like for people's attitudes about marijuana to change, not because of any personal reasons, but I think that the system is overutilizing resources on a narcotic that is a plant, that is not a gateway drug. The science has proven this. I think that states that have legalized, it is now 9 and DC that have fully legalized recreational marijuana. You have 30 states that have legalized it in some majority way, whether it's medical or full legalization of recreational use. More importantly, cities. Mayors and chiefs of police are getting together and saying our officers are diverted from more important crimes, and we are expending massive amounts of resources, probably some racial disparities involved in some of these cities. Atlanta, for instance, they looked at 2 years worth of data in their city between 2014 and 2016 and found that 97% of the cases were African American arrests. Over 90%, and you can't tell me that's not a racial disparity. So what they did is they said, look, less than 1 ounce is going to be a fine-only offense.
Let me ask you a different question. Who's committing the crimes?
Everybody. Are you?
I'm asking you the question. Who's committing the crimes?
Are you asking if the user is committing a crime, or are you asking is
I know this shoot love to break things down to race. If you look at Chicago, people would say that the majority that are being killed by each other, I don't like using race, but it's black on black crime. Listen, I don't think we should be concerned so much about race. It's about who commits the crime. And whether you commit the crime or not, I believe that we are a repentant society. We're a society where people should be rehabilitated. The issue is that there's a reason why people commit these crimes is because they've been thrown in these ghettos by many of these great society programs which have not worked. People have been given promises and made promises, and they've been tossed into these places, and they have no way out. And what we have to admit sometimes that the government, while these programs may have done well in the past, we need to reform some of these programs too. All this plays into this process of getting people as able bodies to work and become a contributing citizen to society. It's not always about race.
They won't need reentry programs like the Dannon Project if we stop locking them up. What failed was not the social network programs. What failed was the war on drugs. And so if we didn't have that, we wouldn't have a mass incarceration problem. And while it wasn't me that broke it down to race, those were Atlanta study
So
figures
the Great Society
that
programs
brought
have
those.
not contributed to the chaos and the lack of opportunity?
I do not think that Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security
welfare
contribute to it.
Well, that's not what we're here to talk about, because obviously you and I could debate and not agree all day. But go ahead.
But for you to say you don't want to break it down to race, and you were harping
but I asked the question in the last segment: how much of a role does race play into it, and why does it play such a role? That's the question we asked.
Well, not to take it out of context, ignorance is not a negative connotation. I think it's ignorance. So even for us to get people to where they're able-bodied individuals to work, the opportunity simply doesn't exist for a lot of minorities, males especially, but even women in Alabama, in central Alabama, in Birmingham, to have opportunity, to have good paying jobs that they have the ability for. I tell our students sometimes.
You're not even talking about people who are incarcerated now.
But even the ones that are incarcerated once they are released. But it all boils down to race, no matter which way you look at it. Race is a factor. It's not the only factor, but it is a huge factor.
So then you've answered the question. They are marginalized because they're black.
It's a factor in it. It's
how much of a factor?
Well, I can't put a percentage on it. I think we have to be.
Is it the overriding factor?
Not necessarily. I think
so.
It's a huge factor.
Okay, fair enough. Other than race, what are the other overriding factors?
Poverty,
race, poverty, your resources. If your parents don't have a abundance of resources for you, you have students that are people that are getting incarcerated. They're trying to build their network and use it at the same time.
Okay, what about choices that people make? Does that play a role?
Yes, absolutely.
How much of a role?
It's a huge role in it.
I know people who come from poverty. I know people who come from single parent households, and they don't make the same choices to go into drugs or go into crime. In fact, they turn out very well because they have a moral code, they have a sense of right from wrong, they have a sense of community and citizenship, and they have this thing called character, which matters.
No one was born and grew up saying, I want to be a drug addict. I want to be arrested. I want to be in and out of the prison. No one that we know grew up with that. Some people are just born into better opportunities, no matter how you spin it, than others are. We can't punish people for being born into bad opportunities.
But we're not. But still, you have to make choices along the way. No matter where you are.
Someone taught them the choices to make. Someone helped them say, hey, these are the options you need to look at to help them find out what path is better for them. And some people don't have that in their lives.
Why don't we offer corporations tax benefits if they hire people who come out of prison? Give them incentives.
Well, man, I think that's a great suggestion, but how do we get corporations to do
that? I think many corporations would do it.
Well, here's the thing. I think that if you were to start talking about tax breaks and money and the ability to get more money for doing something you probably should be doing anyway, I think that why would not a corporation do that? I mean, that's the country that we live in. But I think that what you are asking is very valid because I grew up poor. I grew up below the poverty line. My father died when I was 5 years old. So I was in a single parent household, went through things that we should never have gone through. So I understand the idea of having all of the cards stacked up against you, and statistically, I should not be sitting up here with you all, right? However, I have a master's degree. So I've made some good choices, but I cannot say that because I'm so smart, I made great choices. I can't say that. I think that we have to be honest. Of course there's some bad seed out there. Of course, if you go out there and you rape somebody, you kill someone, of course you should go to jail. And of course, if you are a habitual drug dealer, of course you should go to jail for those things. So I think that we have to take responsibility for our crimes. But I think that we right now want to all of a sudden say, let's hold people accountable. All of a sudden now we want to hold people accountable. All of a sudden now we want to say, let's just be honest. I think that we're not being honest before all of this happened. And I think that we're still not being honest. I think that we're dealing with a group of people who have been traumatized, and people don't want to address that is the issue right there. Yes. And the people who did it don't want, may not have physically been there and have done it, but the people who are responsible, who hold the power, don't want to go there. So therefore, we can keep blaming the victim and say, well, you need to do this. I've done it. Well, you're somebody else who grew up very poor and they did it. Why can't you?
Listen, there is no question that when someone paid their dues and their time for whatever crime they committed, they should be welcomed back into society, particularly on these issues of petty drugs that we're discussing here today. We hire people often who have been involved, who have been incarcerated, and they are so grateful to have the opportunity to be back in the workforce that they rarely blow it. All people are asking for is an opportunity to be given another chance. And no one wants to be patronized. People don't want to be taken care of. They want to take care of themselves. They want to have the self-worth and the dignity to take care of themselves. And so often what we can do, we politicize this. How do we get people to see people as human beings and also see themselves? It's just by the grace of God that it's not them. How do we get there?
How do you get the system to see us as human beings? How do you get the system to see us as human beings?
Who is us?
Any of us. Her, him, me. I didn't. I mean, I won't talk about when I grew up, but I said 20 or 30 years ago to some people that I was working with, volunteering and kind of thing, I said, the way the children are being treated today, they're going to be hardcore 20 years from now, and we'll have to deal with it because of treatment.
Who is treating them this way?
The system.
Who is the system?
The system are the companies. I won't go into naming who the. Well,
you think it's white people?
Some white, some black now.
Okay, so people in power.
In power.
Okay.
Yes, people in power.
And so do they derive their wealth and their power from keeping people in poverty by keeping them into the victim class? Is that what it is? Is that you need a poor class in order to derive wealth and opportunity for certain people in this country?
Did you say need?
Yeah, it's how they derive their wealth and their power.
No, I don't believe that. I think people took advantage of folks. Okay, I think people inherited some, like we as blacks are beginning to do now. I'm at the age where I'm beginning to inherit some of what my dad left, but not much, very little. But other folks were ahead of that. Okay. And so what they took advantage of, build this stack to put them in place of power, of say money, power, to be in charge of other people.
So
and folks have not been fair in any of that.
So you think people?
And they have this, and they have this money and power, and those who helped to get them that money and that power
don't get it
now. And I think not that necessarily you need to hand out anything.
Right.
However, we can't say that it hasn't in some way been earned. So I think there are a lot of conversations that need to be had in order to really even have a good conversation at this point. I think that in order to have the change that we want to have happen, you have to tell the truth. It's like having a marriage at home and you are fighting constantly and you don't really address what the real issue is, but you're able to say, well, let's just be polite to each other. And you're not addressing what your real issues are.
And I think we're about to go to break. I think we should also admit that there are bad people in society.
There are. I admit
who did crime, and it has nothing to do with no race, has nothing to do with class. It's just that people commit crime. Now, everybody in jail, I'm not going to say don't belong there. There are some people in jail that absolutely belong there, and we need to be the first to admit that. All I'm saying, like she mentioned about the rape, the murder, the disrespect for life, there's some people who need to be in prison. We're going to continue this discussion about citizenship reform. I'm Armstrong Williams, your voice, your future.
Observe a domesticated human family in their natural habitat, known to their species as the backyard.
Hey, you think I should light it now?
I think it's good.
Yeah?
Oh dear, someone is about to burn a pile of debris that's too tall, which can start a wildfire. could it be? Blimey, it is.
It's Smokey.
It's Smokey Bear. What a legend.
Hey, it's Smokey. Sorry, it was too high. Right.
Watch as he astutely ensures that there's no wind, and how he removes some of the debris to create a smaller, safer burning pile.
No, you said make it bigger, baby. The bigger the better.
Take note of our fearless furry friend here, humans.
I appreciate it. Fist bump.
He watching you.
Smokey's done it again.
Bye, Smokey.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
I'm only 17, but I know about investing. Believe in something, buy shares in it, watch it grow. So, what if you could invest in the future? The future of kids, like a stock. Not the kind of stock that's about making money, but a stock for social change. A whole new kind of investment called Better Futures. When you invest, it helps kids go to college. I could be one of the first college graduates from my family, the first philanthropist from my neighborhood. And if I'm the first, then maybe there's a second and a third. Believe in us, invest in us, watch us grow. My name is Sydney, and I'm your dividend.
They'll test you. Try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver, the one in control. Stand firm. Just wait. And move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
You know, before we go to our audience with a question, Ms. Farley, you know, I have to always listen. I like what you just said. You said race takes us away from the fundamental issue. It's a distraction. Talk about that.
I honestly believe that race is a factor, to Wayne's point earlier. It's not the only factor.
Okay.
But the reality is African Americans make up 26% of the state population and 56% of the incarcerated population just in Alabama. So you cannot tell me that there's that much of a disproportionate doing of crimes, to your point earlier. That said, we've spent a majority of this time talking about race rather than victimization and what that does to somebody and what they go on to do. Tutwiler is full of domestic violence victims who trafficked drugs, who killed their abusers, who ran away and got trapped in that life because of being victimized themselves. Second point is we made the system. We don't have to incarcerate so many people so that we have to give corporations tax breaks. So I think that we should be having a lot more conversation about why people are incarcerated and for why so long and where our resources are going rather than just race.
Well, tell us. Sure, tell us.
I'll start with mental illness and substance use. Again, about 70 to 80% of Tutwiler's full of women with dual diagnoses, either or and a substance use addiction problem or.
Do you know that women are the fastest growing demographics of
Yes.
people being incarcerated?
Yes.
Incarcerated are women?
Yes, and primarily women of color, to bring up race again. But the male population, you know, Southern Poverty Law Center is involved in a massive statewide litigation, class action, against the Department of Corrections because of the lack of medical and mental health care in prison. And what we've found is that about 30% of that population has a drug and or alcohol with a mental illness, and yet it's not being treated. So 90% of the population in prison is going to get out, to the greater point of what the work that Wayne does and Mary too, but we're not doing anything while they're in there. You think people are getting programmatic? How much access do you have, Wayne, to the facilities?
On the front end, we talk about criminal justice, prison reform, but even in the prisons, like we were talking about earlier, they're not being equipped with the resources knowing they're going to get out at some point. It's very few programs in the prisons to actually equip them with the tools to survive.
Do they like resources?
I think it's how we allocate our resources. Are we being smart about it? Are we being innovative about it? Are we teaching them skills that don't translate into society currently? Are we teaching them skills like technology skills in prison, knowing they're getting out in a year? Why are we teaching having coding boot camps in the prison? Why are we teaching skills that are outsourced, outdated, they can't do anything with? Or why do we relegate them to strictly manual labor training in prisons? You know, it's just how we have to be intentional. We have to be honest, and we have to be intentional about how we're going to solve the problem. All politics aside, just look and say there is a problem. To what we've been talking about, it is a cruel jest to tell a bootless man to pull himself up by his bootstraps. And exactly what Shay just said, we know unequivocally that this was not created by the victim. The crucible that we live in allows for someone to fall into the bottom and to have to strive and scrape to dig their way out, and very few people actually acknowledge that, yeah, they might have messed up at one point, but are we doing anything to help them on their way out? Much less are we putting roadblocks and barricades in front of them as they try to ascend out of this hole.
It sounds as though he is saying that we want them to come back into that incarcerated lifestyle.
I didn't hear that one bit. I don't think anybody on this panel advocates for that.
Wait a minute. If you're not preparing them, if you know what the consequences are, and if you're not giving them the resources, what do you think is going to happen when they get out?
Well,
that's just
I think everybody up here is preparing them and giving them the resources. But we're a minority of people that do that. The Danny Project is a minority of agencies that actually seek out to do that. Some corporations say they're doing it, but are they?
But if they're not, you know the outcome is that's why the recidivism is so high.
Well, are we acknowledging if they're not? Why should a city like Birmingham, overwhelmingly poverty, why are we giving $1 million tax breaks to corporations on the promise of jobs? Are we asking, what is your current employee pool look like now? Is your current 250 employees an actual makeup of Birmingham? If not, why are we even at the table talking about giving you more money, taking away from the poor people that are struggling to give you even more? We got to look at what you do, what's actually there, the results, and not the rhetoric. As a society, we have to get past all this rhetoric and the cameras and the lights and the action. And we got to really look long, hard at what the results are. Because there's a lot of people in a lot of positions of power that maybe we need to start really examining what results have they yielded. If they haven't yielded results, let's get them out of office and get people in there that have a track record and everything they've done to have results. Because they're going to be intentional about getting results. They're going to be intentional about creating pathways and removing barricades and roadblocks and getting away, bulldozing people that actively try to instill it so they can profit off of poverty, incarceration, and other things of that nature.
You know, let's talk about when people come out of prison. He just triggered something. Is it more difficult if you committed a crime in a community, that once you get out of prison, you come back to that community where they frown upon you, and sometimes a prodigal son is not welcome in their own neighborhood? Is it best to put them in another neighborhood where people know very little about them?
I'm going to answer, and I'm going to kick to Miss Mary because I know she works a lot with the communities here in Birmingham, but I will say, of course it is. Either you've been incarcerated so long. I worked with a woman when I was doing the prison reform task force who had been incarcerated so long she didn't know how to pump her own gas because they used to pump the gas for you when she went in. They were not debit cards. Her 9-year-old granddaughter had to get out of the car and pump the gas for her. So, of course, life skills, but the other thing is, of course, neighborhoods. But you were saying the great point, Wayne, which is where's the community investment into the community so that there's jobs on the front end, so there's mental health and substance abuse, so there's training and available resources for domestic violence victims and their families to run away from their abusers, to get away. On the front end, is the system, to Mary's point earlier, designed to keep certain people out of the mainstream life?
You're making my point.
Well, then I made a point with you. How about that?
You're making my point. So are you saying that many people are giving these resources to create these opportunities for people when they come out? To give them a lifeline?
Again, I think you're too focused on the back end.
Okay.
I want you to have a job tomorrow, Wayne, but I would much rather our resources as a community
prepare you for the job.
Taxpayer resources to be on the front end.
Okay, good point.
We're not doing that, and instead we are paying more
on the back end.
Incarcerating someone is the most expensive way of treating the problem. Reinvest those on the front.
It sounds foolish.
It's very foolish.
It's extremely foolish, right? Why? If you can't do these things that we're all talking about out of the goodness of your heart, or morality teaches that it's right, it's good business sense. the bigger the tax base, the more people that are employed and working, it's a bigger tax base. It makes good sense. So if you can't do it because it's the moral thing to do it because financially it benefits our communities too. Help people get resources. Now, little plug, Dannon doesn't just work with reentry. We do help individuals 17 to 24, help them get their GED, get forklift certification, HVAC, youth build certifications too. We do touch that generation a lot. But you can either do prevention or work on collectively is a problem, but prevention is cheaper.
Yes.
And the more people we equip with the resources so they can flourish in life, it's better for everybody. If you don't believe it from, oh, I feel like they should be able to do for themselves, I did for myself, it's better for everybody. Every dollar that's taxed, we can invest back into our communities, invest back into our roads, our highways, our schools. So it's just good business. Why we haven't just looked at it from that point, I don't know.
But
That's a
why
good question.
hasn't that trajectory changed?
It is changing. That's the thing. Alabama's not the first state to take on prison reform. It's a national conversation. The problem is there's no silver bullet, which means the law that we passed a few years ago, it ain't done. Look at a state like Georgia that did adult and then the juvenile system afterwards, and now they're coming back to look more. Other states have closed prisons because they are stopping the flow by investing on the front end. And so I say Alabama's not done. There are simple things like stopping locking children up as adults in adult prisons so that you're fixing a 17-year-old and a 16-year-old's wayward way, help them put boots on to pull their straps up. But the other thing we can do is change the way we do bail. There are many people who are languishing in a jail right now. Miss Mary, you have a point on this.
Some of the rules about when
Talk about the rules. Talk about the rules.
Okay, for example, if a person is come out of prison, cannot get an apartment in public housing for a really, in my opinion, dumb reason, but they can't. So where would one go if there's not anybody in the community too afraid to take a person on? I can't count the people I've had in my home. I can't count the people I picked up on the street, taking them places. And it's been a good example. It's been a learning for me. But everybody else tells me, well, Mary, you got to be careful, okay? Yeah, I am. But I'm also trying to give a person an opportunity to be uplifted, okay, to a level where he or she can function when they are back in this community and get a grip on it.
You know what I'm realizing here is that, and it does make sense, when people come out of prison, they don't have a home, they have nowhere to go, they need everything. Just to get them some kind of structure.
That are in place.
Yeah. And I guess the government is definitely not enough. It takes more than the government.
Anyway.
It takes a village.
So let me raise this for you. I really respect what you just said, that you would take strangers and place them in your home, and with the risk of life and exposure. And you know, it just tells me what a God-fearing woman you are. But if you cannot take them in your home, can't you create environments where they can go?
We'll try that. Yeah.
And what environment is that?
Well, to Mary's point, the law actually denies someone with a criminal conviction from federal housing assistance. So it's not a change that even Miss Mary can do on her own. That's a
Really?
that is that is HUD.
So the law.
Yes.
Where my man is secretary.
Right. And until Alabama
My brother, Dr. Carson, is secretary.
Oh, please, don't go there.
Oh no, he's a good man. I can go there because I know him. I've known him for 27 years.
met him too.
He's a great guy. I don't talk about Dr. Carson because we were not going to agree on that.
But he's absolutely a contact that you could call to help us make this change.
I'm going to have this conversation with him.
Right. Because until we passed the sentencing reform bill a couple years ago, if you had a drug conviction, you couldn't get TANF and SNAP benefits. You had a lifetime ban. We removed that as a state because it was an opt-in, opt-out. It's not the same with housing.
Listen, I'm here to learn as well. Because listen, there are a few people that we know along the way. Because we're all in this together. We're all here to learn because we got to improve upon the situation, because if we don't, we all are jeopardized. And we all are marginalized by it. Hold that point.
Sure.
Hold that point. Jennifer, we'll be back. Don't go away. That's good.
This is the moment I knew. His future had no boundaries. There are some moments only the forest can inspire. Find yours at discovertheforest.org.
So there you are, shuffling through a stack of resumes, and you come to mine. This is it. First impression. My way in. But here's the thing. Can my resume show you how I truly stand out? Can one piece of paper really tell you my whole story? Like that I was studying, going to night school while working 2 jobs just to help my parents pay for groceries. Or how anytime there was an opportunity, I was the first one to step up. Because I wasn't gonna let my life, my circumstances dictate who I was gonna become. And all of that determination, the commitment, the drive, that's me. And that's something you just can't put on paper. Look beyond the resume and discover new ways to develop great talent like me.
Thank you. You got a key?
Go fish.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
And welcome back. Let me introduce our very distinguished panel again. Wayne Hurd, Ms. Farley, Ms. Jones, and our very own Jennifer Gosselin. You know, what is it that, we talk to people now that are incarcerated who want to get out and want to return to productivity. But what do we say to the young people who watch this show who've not been into a life of crime, not been into a life of drugs, and who've not had to face the kind of issues that we discussed today? What do we say to them are the best steps and path forward to stay out of a life of crime, out of a life of drugs? What would you share with them? Because I think that's equally important to this conversation.
I just want to be clear. So you're saying what would we say to young people who have not
been involved in crime and drugs? No, but yet it awaits them if they're not careful.
Mm-hmm. And let me just ask this, because I have to be clear. Are we talking about those kids who are coming from a single household?
No, this is for everybody. Anybody, because rich kids go to jail too. Mm-hmm. Moral kids go to jail too. Crime sometimes no race, no community. What do we do to keep people away from crime?
We have to help our young people today to understand what love is, what respect is. My folks put their hands on me, and that made a difference. Somebody pass you and say, "Ain't he great? Isn't he wonderful?" We don't do that anymore. We're afraid to even get close to each other. Mm-hmm. We're afraid to even look each other in the eye. Because when you do that, something happens. If you do it long enough, just study. We have got to tell our young children, this is not the life that you want to live. But we have got to show them some love from ourselves, as well as hopefully build a community where there's that kind of love that goes around.
I think she makes a very good point, because we mentor a lot of young people, and the problem is that they're lonely.
Yes, sir.
They're isolated.
Left
they
alone.
have no one to talk to. They have suicidal thoughts.
Yes.
They even have thoughts of harming their parents. And it's just not the way we grew up. And sometimes just a conversation to give them a different perspective, to let them know that you care, have someone that they can talk to, can make all the difference in the world. And it doesn't require money. It just requires your time.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm going to come at this from a slightly different
angle.
Okay. Miss Mary and I have known each other for a very long time, and we've done some truth and reconciliation work together in the communities. And I think beyond preaching to and chastising, and even in the spirit of love and Christianity or faith-based conversations, I think it is more about putting people in a room of different philosophies like this. We have lost the ability to communicate honestly and openly with one another. But I think if you look at the principles of restorative justice and about, you spoke earlier about who's harmed when something happens. It's not just the victim and the offender that are involved, it's the family, it's the community. And if you can put people in a room and you can have a class that have had different, upbringing, socioeconomic backgrounds, maybe there's a single parent versus a dual parent, maybe there's no parent, it's a foster care situation. Put them in a room and have a conversation about what life is like, because you don't know until you hear from the other. And I think we do too much talking about and not experiencing of or with. And I think that could really help shape some of the things that we're doing. I think that comes from a place of judgment rather than a healing and a truth sharing.
You talked about your own experiences in abject poverty, and I'm sure there were times when you thought, there's no way out of this, but something happened along the way.
I never thought there was no way out. I had television, and I watched it often. But we lived in the country, and so my mother was very protective of us because she was mom and dad, and we were afraid of my mom. We were afraid, so we couldn't go anywhere. So therefore, I became a cheerleader, and so I loved reading. I read. And that was very important for me. So, I think that with me, what I would tell young people and what I tell them now is that choices. From the moment that you get up, choices. Even what I wear that day, choices. And there are good things that can, emerge from that, and there are also some not so favorable things that can happen as a result of that. But that no matter what, I get to choose my life.
I love that. I love that we've talked about how to stop people from going into crimes. I love that we've talked about how to help the offenders when they leave incarceration. And I love that we've talked a little bit about how to help employers hire people. The one thing we haven't talked about is the system itself.
Okay, talk about the system.
We're continuing to not acknowledge that there are laws in place that overly penalize poverty.
We touched on that.
We touched on it, but we're not spending enough time about it, because until you do that, you're not going, again, the bubble bursts, right? You're squeezing it.
What are some of the other laws? We talked about fair housing.
We talked about fair housing,
Okay.
bail, and people are right now, you and I commit the exact same crime, you can afford to pay bail, you're gone, I'm there. We have the exact same criminal history, and the only reason I'm there is because I can't afford to pay the cash bail required. What's different there? Poverty, and that's the only difference.
Class.
Class, but income, poverty, resources, the fact that you could probably hire an attorney who got you out like that. I don't have an attorney. I have to wait for somebody. That means I have to wait for a hearing, which means after a 3-day experience, probably lost my job, can't afford. I might have lost my kids because they're at home alone because I'm the single parent.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So bail reform is a major component of it.
I think you're absolutely right. And of all these issues, there is one thing that we've touched on, haven't dove in directly. It's we have to seek love. As politicians, as corporations, until we actually listen to each other and act in love. Reinhold Niebuhr said, love is the motive and justice is the instrument. So, but for us actually realizing justice, us actually working towards a just society, a society of empathy, we can never achieve love. And I say achieve deliberately because love takes working at it. We have to constantly sculpt at it. We have to be real with ourselves, acknowledge our own internal biases and prejudices.
But I think Shay makes a good point, and I agree with her. You can have all the love in the world, you can have all the morality, and I believe in morality, God knows. But you've got to have opportunity. You've got to have somebody give you a chance. Sometimes you got to know that the Lord is working in your life. Every now and then you need to see a miracle. You need to see a blessing. You need to say, oh boy, there's my opportunity. I'm going to take advantage of it. And people help create those opportunities. We need to give people opportunities, give them a chance to better themselves, and so they can go back and tell that story in their communities.
I agree completely. And I'll take it. I'm 29. I look a lot older. Had to work a lot hard in my life, or a lot harder than most. But to that point, we live in a society where we love to throw shade and shame. I think it's time that we start throwing shade and shaming those that block opportunity or remove opportunity. So you're right, love alone won't do it. But until we start calling out those people and saying, let's be real, we still need the powers that be, But until we start actually saying, you did this over here and that was wrong, you blocked that opportunity from that young person over there, or you fired this person over here because you found out 3 months while they were on your job that they had a record and you fired them. Why? Until we start holding their feet to the fire. You know, so I think we have to adjust how we call people out on things and call them out on things that are just really unjust.
What you're saying is we can hold people's feet to the fire, and I think that there are many times that we have done that. But I think that until there are consequences, it doesn't matter that we hold their feet to the fire. Until you hit them in the wallet somehow, maybe that would help. But I think that, you know, Twitter, social media, we call people out often, right?
For things that don't matter.
They don't.
But I think we also forget there's still a lot of good people in this country that do all the things that we're talking about, but they never get credit. They never want anybody to know about it. I don't want people listening to this conversation to believe that we have lost faith in each other and we don't empower and support each other, because there are people who do things every day in the smallest way. Because once we start losing the ability and humanity and the fact that we can think about others oftentimes more than we think about ourselves, I think we're lost. And I'm sure in your own life, you've seen the best of human beings, even when you were not expecting it. There's still a lot of good in the world, man.
There's a ton of good. There's a ton of good.
There's a
you
ton
have to
of
be
good.
intentional about listening and receiving it and seeing it in people.
Yeah, because listen, when she tells the story about bringing people in her home, that touched me because I couldn't do it. And I want to do it. I can't. I'm sorry. I'm not going to ever lie to myself. But I appreciate that you have the capacity, and we need to be more like that. But not everybody can do that, but there's some things that we can do. Everybody has something that they bring, a gift and a talent to make the world better around them.
Yes, I agree with that.
And that's what we have to do.
It's about trust.
It's trust, but verify. Yes,
That's fine too.
I get that. I'm telling you, won't be coming to my house, but I will help you along the way. I may give you a job. That one, but and especially.
But you see, when I took this young man in, I pointed him to the city where he still works. He's now a supervisor, and bought a house down the street from me. Right? If he hadn't had that support, and he went back to school, if he hadn't had that shove and encouragement and saying, "You can do it," get with it. You know, I didn't feed him. I told him where to go and get food. And when they called me, when the food stamp folks say, "Well, we have to have your share," I said, "No, you don't. You got to know nothing about me. You dealing with him. I'm not feeding him. He's got to provide his way to work. He rode my bicycle until he saved up enough money to buy him a car." Okay? So he did that. But I was there saying, get with it. You know, shoving and
Let me raise this because I know we're about out of time. How can people find out more about what you do?
Southern Poverty Law Center. Our website is www.splcenter.org.
Wayne?
Dannon Project, dannonproject.org. Stop by. We're off 5th Avenue North, across from the downtown post office. We would love to see you. Get involved, meet some of our participants, volunteer.
Ms. Jones?
And we provide food and clothing and financial assistance with people for their utility.
You have a website?
Greater Birmingham Ministry, gbm.org.
And I'm sure you have a Twitter feed where people can watch you.
Of course. Just go to abc3340.com, look up Jennifer Gonsalves.
You know, I cannot thank Howard Cirque Holdings and ABC 3340 enough for this very important town hall meeting. Because listen, we all have something to contribute. And while we may not think we agree on one thing, is the upliftment of our sisters and our brothers, especially those who really have had much to smile about in their lives. We want to make it better. Thank you for joining us. I'm Armstrong Williams. Your voice, your future. Register it.
Do you want to retire like a champ? Just like legendary basketball star Uncle Drew?
Don't do him like that, Uncle Drew!
You're already acing the game. You've got your dream ride.
Don't be slamming my door.
Sorry about that.
You just did the same.
Gotta get the boys. Your dream vacation and your dream team. And now you can make your retirement just as legendary.
I get buckets.
Get the tips you need to get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
Hey, you.
Yeah, you. Getting that college education? What are you gonna do? Graduate and take some office job? Be like everybody else? Or will you dare do something different? Like be a teacher. You could be my teacher. You got the skills. The smarts? Yes, you. You could be the teacher I never forget. That'd be cool. Does that corporate job even have recess? What are you gonna make of yourself? What are you gonna make of me?
It takes less than 1 minute to find out if you may have prediabetes, and you can do it here. So what are you waiting for? Just go to the site.